The series starts with Gia, the main writer's assistant at a Korean FM radio station. She's the one sitting on live air, not because she's a star, but because the artist who's supposed to be hosting the show hasn't shown up, and no one knows where he is, until he calls them in the middle of the broadcast. Gia tells the audience that the beloved artist is calling them now, but as soon as she opens the call, she's met with him insulting her, the radio, and himself. He says he doesn't want to see their faces again and hangs up. They wish they never answered the call. The radio manager calls Gia and the main director and humiliates them in front of the radio staff. He tells them that if the artist doesn't show up tomorrow for his live show, he'll cancel their program and kick them all out onto the street to beg for money. The idiots all blame Gia, even though she's not related to the artist at all. She's just a small writer trying to get a chance. She tells them she'll handle it and promises to bring the artist to the radio. Meanwhile, the artist is partying at a hotel with his friends, and there's a big event happening in the same hotel for a popular drama starring the famous Korean actor Soo and the young actress Won. During the press conference, there's a journalist who doesn't like Soo's family at all and tries to ask him embarrassing questions in front of the press about him and his company. But Soo answers all the questions wisely. At the same time, Gia goes to the hotel room where the artist is staying and entertains his friends with her skills in serving drinks, both carbonated and non-carbonated. All of this is to get the artist to promise that he'll come to the live show the next day and not embarrass her in front of the radio manager. Later, we see Soo with his parents in an elevator. By coincidence, he sees Gia talking on the phone and seems to recognize her. He even notices her, and when his parents ask if he knows her, Soo says no. They sit in the hotel restaurant for his mother's birthday, discussing who will buy her more gifts and flowers. People around them are impressed and taking pictures. After they're done, Gia arrives with the artist she's been trying to bring in, who's completely wasted, and they coincidentally ride the elevator with the famous Soo. It seems like they know each other. Gia tries to be polite and tells Soo she's a writer at the radio and invites him to attend an upcoming episode, but he mocks her and hints that he's suspicious about her relationship with her drunk artist. He then leaves. Gia is furious about what he said. She returns to the radio, sits with her colleagues, who feel just as underappreciated as she does, and tells them about what happened. One of them, who has a crush on Soo, says she can't believe he would say something like that because he's such a sweet and beloved person. Her other friend tells her that there are some rumors circulating. God willing, it's all for the best, she says. She mentions that Soo's family, especially his father, is obsessed with young girls, and every young actress who works with them ends up having some kind of relationship with him. Meanwhile, Soo's mother, who constantly donates money to orphans, is obsessed with brands and expensive things, spending her money in an extravagant way. She's also a very domineering person. Gia takes the opportunity to tell them a story from a few years ago when she was at a party and Soo was there. He purposely tripped her, and instead of apologizing, he told her to do something to grab his attention because he thought she was one of his fans. When she told him he was the one who tripped her, Soo denied it, saying it wasn't his fault and that he recognized fan behavior. He came off as a very arrogant person, even leaving without helping her get up. We then shift to Soo, who is treating his manager poorly. He tells him to go ahead without him, as he'll drive alone. We learn that Soo suffers from nightmares every night and struggles with psychological issues. The next day, Gia tries to ease the tension with the arrogant head writer by bringing her some stress-relieving treatment and showing her her new work. However, the head writer, who is very arrogant, mocks Gia and criticizes the script she wrote, throwing it in her face and walking away. At this point, a strange man, dressed unusually as if he's just returned from a 9-year trip to the Amazon jungle, approaches Gia. He takes her sandwich and walks away. He heads straight to the radio station's director's office, where we find out that this odd man, named John, is a brilliant mind despite his eccentric behavior. The radio manager talks to him, and John tells him that since he left, the radio has been losing its audience and he must return to host the program again, as he did before. He says he went to India for 2 years to meditate because he dislikes anything that stresses him out. Back to Gia, when she enters her office, she finds her director and the head writer furious. It turns out their artist, who was hosting the program, posted his photo on Facebook at the airport. He tells them that he's decided to quit and leave Korea for good. He also calls Gia to thank her for the advice she gave him yesterday and says he's leaving the radio to figure out his future. She's the one who convinced him. Gia, feeling frustrated, gets in her car and drives to the airport. She wonders to herself, What future? He's figuring out his future, but my future is ruined. She manages to catch him before he boards the plane and tries to stop him, but he runs away after being surrounded by his female fans. She returns home feeling regretful and defeated. When she arrives at her mother's house, we learn that her mother lost her sight in an old accident, but is still very capable and independent. Gia tells her mother about the situation at work, but her mother, who is full of positive energy and hope, reassures her. She tells Gia that tomorrow she'll be the best and most successful writer in all of Korea, and that the future is brighter ahead. They both go to sleep, and we learn that Gia's mother is the one who got her interested in radio. This happened after her mother had an accident and lost her sight. At that time, Gia was in high school, and she promised her mother that she would be her eyes and help her see the world. Since then, Gia has loved radio because her mother loved it. The next day, Gia wakes up to her phone ring. It's the crazy director, John, who tells her that he's chosen her, over all the other writers at the radio, to be part of his new program. She's overjoyed, and of course, Gia rushes to meet him. John continues talking to her about his program idea. It seems that everyone at the radio station is terrified of him, and whenever he enters any place, everyone avoids him. However, he tells Gia that he will give her a little test, and if she passes, she will become the head writer of the show. The test is to get the famous actor Suho to host the program. It's like telling someone to jump into a fire. Suho, who already has a full team of writers and secretaries choosing his roles with high standards, seems like an impossible target for Gia. But Gia doesn't give up. She digs for information about him because her dream of becoming the head writer has been with her since childhood. Meanwhile, Suho is filming his historical drama. Gia figures out where he's shooting and heads to the set. She makes a girl film outside his trailer. His manager comes out to get rid of her, but Gia uses the opportunity to approach Suho and offer him food and drinks while talking to him about her radio station. But he shows no interest in her at all. His manager drags her away and throws her out. However, Gia still doesn't give up. When she learns that the lead actress has to fall into a lake for a scene, but is too scared to do it, Gia steps in and tells the director that she will perform the scene herself. The director agrees. When Suho sees her, he's annoyed and tells her to stop following him around. Gia doesn't let his words affect her and goes ahead with the scene. Unfortunately, she has to repeat the fall more than 10 times. It's exhausting, and on the last take, her legs twist painfully, and she ends up sitting in the water for a while. At that moment, Suho, the sensitive artist, gets worried about her and is about to jump into the water himself. He remembers his high school days and realizes that he knows her. She was his classmate, and he had a crush on her back then. But just as Gia emerges from the water, Suho's gaze shifts between love and concern. When he sees that she's tired, he picks her up on his shoulders without waiting for her consent and carries her to the car, even though she tries to talk to him during the ride. When they reach her house, Gia is shocked that he knows where she lives, but he doesn't respond to her questions and leaves without saying anything. When Suho returns home, his manager is very upset because he left the filming without informing him. He tells Suho that anytime he's out of sight, his mother, who manages the company, will scold him and could even fire his manager. However, Suho doesn't care about any of that. As usual, he ignores his manager's concerns and the manager continues talking, but Suho doesn't respond. Then the doorbell rings and a person who looks a bit crazy enters. The manager asks who he is, and the man laughs, joking that he's Suho's new manager. But it turns out that he's not joking. He's brought his suitcase with him. Suho tells the manager that the man will be staying with him for a few days, and to clarify things, the man is Suho's psychiatrist. He's come to live with him to study his condition up close. Of course, Suho doesn't know this. The manager informs Suho's mother about everything, as usual, but she tells him to focus and keep a close watch on Suho. At that moment, she receives a threatening message from an actress named Tara. We learn that Tara used to be famous when she and Suho were children, but no one remembers her now, and she no longer acts. She's trying to get back into the entertainment industry by using Suho and his family, even if it means spreading rumor. Tara is sitting in a famous hair salon, doing her hair, when she sees a young actress currently working with Suho. Seeing the crowd gathered around the young actress upsets Tara, and she pulls the girl aside, telling her that she was once very famous in her youth. Tara warns her that if she doesn't respect herself, she'll regret the day she became famous. Naturally, the young actress runs off, confused about what Tara wants from her. Meanwhile, Gia goes to work, and John takes her to her new office. It's been closed for about 10 years and is full of dust, but he tells her it will be hers. She sits down and tries to convince him that they can find someone else to host the program instead of Suho. since not only is he arrogant, but he also doesn't have the skills to be a radio host. However, John insists on Suho. Later, Gia sits with a famous writer who is her role model and tells him what's been going on. He encourages her and motivates her to keep going and reach her goal. Meanwhile, Suho's mother has a conversation with him, telling him that his manager needs to stay with him at all times because he protects him and ensures his work is safe. She emphasizes how controlling and dominant she is over him. She gives him a scarf and tells him that today is his birthday. Although he seems upset, he recalls when he was a child, and his mother gave him the same scarf with a similar design, placing it around his neck. She told him with malice that she wasn't his real mother, and would not accept any mistakes from him. He had to always be exceptional and obedient to remain in her good graces. We find out that Suho's mother is a cold, manipulative woman, and she is not his real mother. Suho returns home in a depressed state after recalling his painful past, which we learn is one of the major traumas of his life. However, his friend, the psychiatrist, manages to pull him out of his dark thoughts by playing loud music and making a mess in the house as if it were his own. Suho tries to talk to him but finds him running around the house, so he leaves and retreats to his room to continue his depression. Meanwhile, Gia is trying every possible way to reach Suho's phone number or even contact his manager, but she is unsuccessful. Eventually, she decides to go to the company. She arrives, but the receptionist refuses to let her in. Just then, Suho arrives, grabs her hand, and leads her out of the building. He asks her to drive, and in the car, Gia continues talking to him about her radio show, how many awards it has won, and how many people follow it. Suho rejects the idea. He tells her to never ask about this topic again, as he's not willing to sacrifice his career as an actor and artist just to work at a useless radio station. These words suddenly ignite Gia's pride, which has been almost non-existent throughout the series. Now she gets upset and firmly responds saying, "You can insult me, but not my radio. I won't allow it." She then gives him a tablet with a video of their radio show and tells him to think carefully, as this is an opportunity he won't get again. She leaves him, walking away. Later, Suho returns home to find his psychiatrist friend has prepared a large meal for him. The doctor tells him that he needs to eat well to recover from his depression. Suho, irritated, complains that his friend always treats him like a patient, constantly reminding him of his condition. He leaves the doctor and goes to his room, while the doctor jokes about how annoying it is to be constantly reminded of his depression. Meanwhile, the company's manager, Kim, is sitting with her husband, and it's clear that their relationship is strained. They discuss work, and she criticizes him for spending too much time meeting young women, as the press has started to pick up on the rumors, which could harm her reputation. Suho, on the other hand, is at work, but his thoughts keep drifting back to Gia, wishing she were there with him. Just then, his psychiatrist friend appears at the office, and Suho's manager catches them talking. The manager asks who the doctor is, and the psychiatrist explains that he's a friend of Suho's and will be living with him. After a filming session, one of the actors invites Suho to join the team for a night out at a hotel. Suho initially refuses, but when he hears Gia will be there, he changes his mind. Gia arrives at the hotel with many drinks and joins the rest of the cast and crew. She impresses everyone with her skill in playing drinking games, but eventually she becomes drunk. The actor, who is part of Suho's crew, sees this as an opportunity and tries to take her to his place to take advantage of her. When Gia wakes up, she finds herself in a respectable house, confused about whose house it is. She remembers the previous night when the actor tried to take advantage of her, but someone else intervened and saved her. She looks around and realizes that the person who saved her is Suho. We discover that Suho was the one who took her away after he hit the actor who tried to take advantage of her. Suho asks Gia to change her clothes, but when he learns that Kim is coming over to his house, he asks Gia to do something for him. He tells Kim that he will join the radio program to fix the situation, a decision that greatly frustrates him. Gia enters and is asked by the radio manager if she is okay. She confirms it, but it's clear that Suho is the one who put her in this awkward position. After Miss Kim leaves, Suho tells Gia that he's not interested in the radio or anything else because his entire life is full of lies and pretensions. This leads Gia to argue with him and leave. Both of them feel a sense of bitterness and sadness deep inside. Suho watches the video Gia made and realizes how important the radio is to her. Gia, in turn, goes to watch a recording of a famous writer she admires. Afterwards, the radio manager asks her to come see him. She finds that the main writer, who is greedy and demanding, is arguing with the radio manager and director, John, because they allowed a trainee like Gia to work as the primary writer for such an important show. The writer is referring to Gia and tries, along with the radio manager, to change John's opinion so that the greedy writer can remain in charge, but John refuses, saying that Gia must either work on the radio program or he will leave. He walks away, leaving Gia in an awkward situation where she doesn't know how to defend herself. The greedy writer doesn't let this go, and after leaving the manager's office, calls Gia over and humiliates her in front of everyone. She tells Gia that she's a failure, that she'll never succeed, and questions who Gia thinks she is, working with a famous actor like Suho. She insists that Gia will never be able to convince him. However, the show's writer has a different opinion. At that moment, Suho enters and calls out for Gia. He tells her that he's willing to work with her and asks, "What do you think? Are you ready to work with me?" But once he steps away, he scolds her for not standing up for herself and not confronting the writer who was putting her down. This frustrates Gia, and they argue. Later, she goes to get his drink, and they sit and drink together. She tells him that the greedy writer should be her mentor, and that it's unacceptable for her to make mistakes in front of her. Suho returns from outside and talks to his friend, the doctor, who asks him if he's really going to work with the radio. Suho admits that he's not sure, even though he initially rejected the idea. However, he's doing this for Gia, and confesses to his friend that he has feelings for her. The doctor is thrilled and tells him that this is the first step in healing himself. The following day, for the first time, the radio manager treats Gia kindly and hands her the contract. He asks her to make sure Suho signs it and not to leave until he has done so. Gia goes to his house, but she remains hesitant for about 4 hours, wondering whether she should go in or not. She tries to convince herself that Suho is a good person. When she eventually enters and asks him to sign the contract, he tells her that he also has conditions. He gives her 4 difficult conditions, such as being able to leave whenever he wants, demanding things from Gia at any time he pleases, and no one should force him to do anything. Additionally, the recording should not be live but pre-recorded so he can fix any mistakes. Gia is at a loss for words and returns to the director without revealing the condition. The director, without seeing the terms, tells her that Suho has agreed. She's surprised that the actor actually agreed. When she tells him the conditions, he says he will handle it. He comforts her, showing that he's treating her very kindly. Meanwhile, John goes to the radio manager and tells him he wants to create a strong competition between his show and the one led by the greedy main writer. Both the writer and the director are worried because they know that John is a skilled director, and any project with him will be successful. However, the manager agrees, believing it will improve the quality of their programs. The director tries to argue with John, but John remains calm and collected, easily handling the situation. He leaves without further conflict. Gia continues to struggle with writing the first episode of the program, feeling extremely unsure about every word because it's her first time as the main writer. Meanwhile, Suho gathers his team and gets information about everyone working with him on the radio, including John, Gia, and even the assistant director and other team members. At the same time, the actress Tara gives Miss Kim photos, revealing that she and Miss Kim's husband are having an affair. She implies that she might use this information to blackmail Miss Kim into helping her become as famous as Suho. After leaving Kim's office, she runs into Suho and his manager, who ignore her completely. They walk past her, and the manager doesn't respond when she tries to greet him. However, she calls out to him and reminds him that there was a time when he was her manager too. He then talks to her, asking her not to cause trouble and to focus on her own talent. He advises her to rely on her abilities and not on anything else, before walking away. Meanwhile, Suho talks to Kim, who tells him that while she respects his decision to work on the radio, she hopes it won't affect his work in the dramas. The next day, Suho, his doctor, and his manager go to the radio station, where Gia greets them. The whole station is amazed by their presence, especially Suho, the famous actor. The radio manager welcomes him warmly and asks them to sit down to sign the contract. However, Suho says, "I'm here because Gia convinced me." So the radio manager agrees and goes to Gia's office. He starts teasing her a bit before signing the contract with her. Then the director John arrives, greets Suho, and notices the closeness between John and Gia, which makes Suho uneasy, though he doesn't express it. After that, John greets everyone and leaves. Gia, on the other hand, is in the best moment of her life. She's starting to succeed. But suddenly, the greedy main writer, the owl-like woman, appears and demands to see the episode Gia has written. Gia, as usual, can't refuse but cleverly tells her that all the copies are with director John and manages to escape. Unfortunately, she can't escape from John, who is full of energy and enthusiasm. He continues to annoy everyone on his, even going as far as entering the assistant director's bathroom and telling him to come out, or he would open the door himself. He keeps annoying the competing director, sharing his work plan and criticizing their work when it's presented to him, telling them it's not good and needs to be redone. At the end of the day, John takes his team out to party together. It's clear that there is good chemistry among them and they start to understand each other better. Meanwhile, after Gia leaves them, she finds her mother and friends gathered at the restaurant, celebrating her success. Her mother is very proud of her. The next day, Miss Kim calls Gia to her office and sits with her and Suho. Miss Kim continues to impose harsh conditions on Gia and belittles her to push her away from Suho. This frustrates Suho, and he ends the meeting. At the same time, the greedy writer and her director are annoyed and determined to cause trouble for Gia. Gia, exhausted from everything, ends up falling asleep at her desk, dreaming about Suho and Miss Kim. But she's woken up by director John, who tells her it's late and she needs to go. To her surprise, John is going to the same place as his apartment is below hers. She recalls how when she first started working at the radio station, she was the main writer under the same director, John, and how she used to be a controlling and mean person toward Gia. John always defended her. Gia wonders how that same writer was once her mentor. Later, Gia welcomes John into her apartment, and they sit and have drinks together. She calls the doctor because she has his number, and tries to get in touch with Suho, who we learn doesn't have a personal phone. All his calls and communications go through his manager. Gia asks John to contact him, and John takes her phone, telling Suho they are together. Suho, feeling jealous, rushes to their location. They talk about work, but Suho's attention is mainly on John, who is getting closer to Gia. It bothers Suho that John also lives in the same building. Feeling frustrated, Suho decides to challenge John and work closely with him. Afterward, when Suho leaves, John tells him that they will travel the next day to a small village to record from there. Of course, Suho agrees because he doesn't want to leave Gia alone with John. However, he tells Gia that she will have to pick him up the next day. When Suho arrives, he tells the doctor everything that happened, and the doctor is very pleased, saying that he will come with them. Meanwhile, Suho keeps thinking about John and Gia's closeness, especially since they live in the same building, which is driving him crazy. The next day, Gia does indeed come and picks him up. They arrive at the port where the whole team is waiting, holding banners with his name, and everyone is happy. However, once they board the boat, Suho is visibly irritated by John and Gia's proximity. At that time, Miss Kim and her husband are at a press conference, and everyone is taking photos of them. However, Miss Kim notices the actress Tara standing with a journalist who dislikes Suho. She signals to her manager, who immediately goes over to them. At that moment, the journalist is asking Tara if she knows any scandals or secrets about Suho's family. The manager interrupts and orders the journalist to leave, while he takes care of Tara. After the conference, Miss Kim, her husband, and the actress are in the elevator. Miss Kim warns them, subtly implying that she knows about their relationship, before leaving to continue her photo session with the journalist. Tara then seizes the opportunity and grabs their bag, asking the photographers to take pictures with her. Miss Kim refuses to react harshly, allowing Tara to pose for the photos. As she does so, Miss Kim warns her one last time that the journalists might find out something damaging, and she knows many things. Tara should help her get closer to Suho, or she will expose everything. Meanwhile, the entire team is waiting for the boat to take them across to the other side, towards the village. There's only one boat that comes twice a day. They finally board and make their way to the village, walking and joking, throwing snow at each other. Suho feels uncomfortable and annoyed the entire time. When they finally arrive at the house where they will stay, Gia realizes that she has forgotten her bag with her laptop and important papers, which is probably still at the station. She has to go back immediately. She tries to go alone, but Suho follows her, saying he'll go back because he's not staying there. They ride a scooter since there's no other way to get there. Meanwhile, the main writer is trying to destroy their program, but Gia manages to convince Suho to stay with her. They both get on a bus to head back, but by the end of the route, they realize that it's already night and they were actually going in the wrong direction. There's nothing that will get them back to the village except for the next day. By chance, they meet an elderly man who hugs Suho, calling him his son, whom he says he abandoned and moved away from 12 years ago. The man seems to be confused, but he insists on taking them to stay at his house. Neither Gia nor Suho can refuse the old man's request, as he is very persistent. Meanwhile, Tara is out at a nightclub and one of the men there starts bothering her. Suddenly, Suho's manager shows up, punches the man, and takes Tara out of the club. It's clear that he's interested in her and feels jealous. Tara, who is manipulative, tells him that since he didn't leave her now, he should help her become famous again. However, the manager refuses. Gia and Suho go to the old man's house, where he prepares food and a place for them to stay. Because of his love for Suho, he insists that Suho sleeps inside the house, while Gia is sent to sleep outside the door, which is very rude. But eventually, the old man talks to her, reads the script Gia wrote, and exhausted, Gia falls asleep. Suho picks her up and takes her inside to sleep. However, while he's sleeping, he has the same recurring nightmare, which is more than just a dream. We learn that Suho had a friend in high school, and during a period of depression, he tried to distance himself from him. But one day, his friend saw him from across the street, waved, and ran toward him. Suddenly, a truck hit his friend, and Suho couldn't do anything to stop it. His friend died in front of his eyes, and since then, Suho has been suffering from nightmares and psychological issues. The next morning, Gia wakes up and realizes that the elderly man had left without even saying goodbye. When she meets with her colleagues at the port, she finds out that he has left the entire area. Suho returns, and his manager takes him home. When Suho tries to speak harshly to his manager, he reveals that on the day of the accident, his friend had called him multiple times, but Suho didn't answer. This is the reason Suho resents his manager. Meanwhile, Miss Kim manages to meet with the greedy writer, and they agree to work together to destroy Suho's show. The team starts preparing to record the first episode of their program, and on the recording day, Suho arrives and begins recording. All the radio staff are present in the studio to witness this important moment. However, the surprise comes when Suho doesn't say a single word from the script Gia wrote. Instead, we find out that his team had written a script for him, and he sticks to it. After the episode, the greedy main writer gloats over Gia, and even director John doesn't show any support, telling her that the episode was fine. He leaves, visibly upset, and Gia, disappointed, watches him go. She feels that he has no idea how much effort she put into writing that script. But what else could she expect from someone as arrogant as him? Gia walks away, upset, but John doesn't want her to leave in that state. He asks her to stay out and hang out with him. While they are out, Suho sees them, gets angry, and drags Gia away. He tells her that she will spend the evening with him. A fight breaks out between Suho and John, and Gia yells at both of them, saying she doesn't need either of them. As Suho's fans gather around him, he orders John to follow him. They start racing their cars at full speed, competing to see who can reach Suho's house first. When they finally arrive at his house, they go inside and continue drinking, chatting, and hanging out. At that time, Gia arrives home and her friend sends her some videos about director John and the people he's worked with. We learn that John is a very violent person, and anyone who refuses to follow his orders literally ends up in trouble. He's truly mad. The next day, Tara goes to the radio station as a guest on the show where the greedy writer works, who is known as the Owl. After filming, Tara meets the young actress who disrespects her. Tara yells at the actress, and at that moment, Gia sees her and is impressed by Tara, as she knows her and is very happy to meet her. They take pictures together, which makes Tara very happy. Afterward, they go back to record the second episode of the program. But Suho is surprised to find that they're live on air, and a phone call comes in from a girl. Her father is the one talking on the phone, scolding Suho. The artist gets upset and tells them to stop the episode, but John laughs and tells him they're recording. This frustrates Suho even more because they had agreed to a live broadcast. After the episode, Suho confronts John, telling him that there's a clause in the contract that prevents live broadcasts. John shows him the contract, and Suho realizes that John had made him sign it yesterday, which meant it was perfectly fine to record it live. This frustrates Suho even more. Even when Suho's manager comes to threaten John and asks him to remove the clause, John agrees and removes it from his phone, along with the video of Suho being upset. But he secretly thinks that Suho is very stupid because John can easily reverse these things. Gia runs after Suho and tries to apologize, but she finds his manager arriving to take him away. She quickly hands him her phone and leaves. When she returns, she finds that all the girls at the radio station are treating her badly because she's so close to Suho, the artist they all admire. The arrogant main writer takes advantage of Gia's kindness and asks her to take these gifts and distribute them in the cold winter weather as part of a Christmas activity the radio station does every year for their listeners. Gia agrees and goes out to distribute the gifts to those who answer questions. Meanwhile, the main writer continues to record Tara's episode, which is a complete disaster. They really deserve this trouble. As for Suho, he's upset, and when he looks at the phone Gia gave him, he finds it's her phone, with pictures of them from the day they traveled to the village. At that moment, Kimo arrives and asks Suho to have lunch with her. However, Gia's phone rings, and Suho quickly leaves to answer, discovering that it's Gia's mother who's calling. He hurries to meet her and learns that her purse has been stolen, something she's used to. That's why she never keeps important things in her bag. Suho takes her home, impressed by her skills despite being blind. She's smart and can even cook for herself. She insists that he have lunch with her, treating him kindly. Later, Gia's mother continues to criticize Suho because her daughter hates him and always insults him, but Suho doesn't mind. He even refuses to tell her that it's actually Gia who's been insulting him. Afterward, he says goodbye to Gia's mother and takes Gia back to the radio station, asking her to explain some things to him. Of course, this is just an excuse because he wants to spend more time with her. They stay at the radio station until Gia falls asleep. Suho stays beside her, looking at her with affection and love. The next day, there's an evaluation by the radio manager who says that Suho's program has been successful. Naturally, he continues to provoke and belittle the main writer and the arrogant director. The hotel manager pleads with him to lend them Suho for just one episode of another show, but he refuses. Meanwhile, they have breakfast together, and as they're talking, John comes to sit with them and eats Gia's food as usual. He tells them that they need to meet with the people they'll be having on upcoming episodes. He asks Suho to come with them, saying that he's handsome and sweet like honey and nuts. The first person they go to see is a famous older writer who initially refuses. However, he later agrees to meet Suho for a golf game sometime. The second person they meet is a chemist whose inventions have all failed, and no one likes him. He has thought about quitting several times, but they encourage him and promise him that they will showcase his inventions to the public. Eventually, he agrees to record with them. At that time, Tara is out late with two directors who are trying to belittle her for no longer being famous. She gets angry at them, and one of them slaps her in the face with a sharp pain. This is when Suho's manager enters, takes her out, and then goes back to lecture the director, reprimanding them with class before leaving. Tara thanks him and asks for his help. He weakens in front of her because he admires and loves her. Tara, too, begins to feel something towards Suho. She calls him to check on him, but he seems eager to end the conversation quickly. When she asks him why, he says that if she gave him her private number, he'd end up calling her every day. She doesn't know how to respond, and he tells her that he has a shoot in another city tomorrow, and asks her to pick him up and take him there, and then they can go back to the radio station together. He ends the call with her. The next day, Gia picks him up from his house and drives him. He has a commercial shoot with the young actress. During the break, he gets some food to go have lunch with Gia, but she tells him she has to go on an errand and leaves him. He returns to the shooting location, but the surprise is that Kim asks the director to fire the young actress and replace her with Tara for this commercial campaign. The two start fighting over the issue, grabbing each other by the hair. Gia has gone to a primary school and orphanage in the same city as the shoot. There, she meets a very stubborn child who is rude and speaks in a way that reminds her exactly of Suho. This makes her curious about the child. The director reveals the surprise when she tells Gia that the child had a friend. When a family came to adopt the friend, sadly the child's friend died. Because of their bond, the director didn't want to tell the boy the truth, instead telling him that his friend went with his family and would return soon. The child has refused to go on any vacation. Meanwhile, Suho continues his shoot with Tara, who tries to talk to him afterward, but he ignores her as usual and walks away. Suho and Gia head back in the car, but unfortunately, the weather service reports a very strong storm, which closes all roads, preventing anyone from traveling or moving out of the city. John calls Gia, and after learning where they are, he tells her that he'll send a satellite car, but she needs to write the script quickly, and they have to prepare an episode. Gia suddenly comes up with a brilliant idea after recalling the stubborn child she met at the orphanage, and she shares it with everyone. They all agree to go back to the orphanage quickly. Suho goes to talk to the child, but he finds that the child is even more stubborn than him. And just before the live broadcast starts, the director informs them that the child had disappeared after coming and asking her a question, and she didn't know how to answer. That his friend had passed away? So Suho and Gia search for him everywhere until Suho finally finds his location. The child is waiting for his friend on the road. Suho goes to talk to him, convincing him that his friend is really gone and will not be coming back. The satellite car arrives and everything is ready to go. The broadcast starts and John and his team follow it from their side. Towards the end, Suho hosts the child, who starts crying and gives a piece of advice. If you have a friend, never distance yourself from them, and never tell them the time when you need them the most. Feelings are the most important thing in life. Because of the beauty of the episode, Suho is asked to end the broadcast in his own way. He says a sweet line that Gia once told him during high school. Just because you smile and laugh doesn't mean you're happy. In fact, you might be the one who needs love, a hug, and reassurance the most. All people need that. After the broadcast is successful and everyone is very happy, Gia moves closer to Suho, who is finally ready to confess that he knows her and loves her deeply. He gently places his hand over her eyes and gives her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. We learn that Suho met Gia back in high school, but she always covered her eyes to feel the emotions of those who were blind, in an attempt to connect more with her mother. That's why she never saw the face of the boy she liked in high school, who is, in fact, he is about to confess to her that he is the boy. But before he can, John calls him. On the way, Gia tries to talk to him and justify the awkward situation they were in, but he is not ready to discuss it at all. He tries to avoid the topic, and both of them head home separately. Suho keeps thinking about what happened, while his doctor tells him that he has to face whatever situation he finds himself in. Suho goes back to his writing, continuing the book he's been working on about his own condition. The next day, Suho tells the press that he loves radio and wants to continue with it. He has found love now. These two words annoy his mother, but they annoy her even more when she refuses any new job offers because he's sticking with radio for a while. She goes to work feeling hopeless and lacking passion for everything, but she also overhears people talking about her, saying that she only smiled once and that she didn't deserve it. So she goes to talk to director John and asks him why he chose her specifically. He tells her that he wanted to see if the ambitious girl, the one who never lets anything stand in her way, would keep up the same energy and effort for how long. That's why he gave her an impossible task, to convince Suho. If she couldn't convince him, he still thought she was an impressive person and wanted to work with her. At that moment, Suho tries to talk to her, but she's with John and they go out for a walk together. He asks her to talk to him, and he tries to express his feeling. She tells him that he's famous, a big star, and it's hard for them to be together, but he responds that she's the one who started it all and chased him everywhere until he fell in love with her. Now, she's surprised. When he sees John talking to her, he gets even more upset and leaves. Later that night, Suho buys a new phone, but he has his manager sign the paperwork so no one knows who he is. He calls Gia and tells her that he got the phone, and now she has to call him every day to check on him. They whisper sweet things to each other. He also asks her to come over so they can continue working because there are cameras around his house. Gia goes to his place and he's prepared a literal feast. The troublesome Kim shows up and tries to ruin things. Suho kicks her out of his house and takes Gia to drop her off. Gia tells him to calm down and be less arrogant, as his attitude might harm him in the long run. Kim, however, decides to teach him a lesson and calls Tara. In front of Tara, Kim belittles the little actress and kicks her out, telling Tara that she will be the one featured in future projects. She also announces her official engagement to Suho at a press conference, just to make him feel uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Gia remembers the boy she had a crush on in high school, whom she never saw, Suho. She pulls out the memory box with the letters he wrote to her. At the same time, Suho also finds his memory box and starts reminiscing about her. They both feel the connection between them, even though they're apart. Tara, still living her life as a famous actress and a conceited writer, tries again to ask Gia for the episode's script, but Gia tells her it's with the director, and she doesn't have it. To her surprise, she actually finds the original script with John. He leaves the room with the script, and the conceited writer takes it and leaves. Later, they all gather to record the episode. Gia and Suho are in the recording booth together, but they realize that the script has disappeared just 30 seconds before the recording starts. The surprise comes when artist Suho is revealed to be the one with the script. He skillfully takes control of the situation and saves the day. They finish recording, but then they find that the conceited writer has spread multiple copies of the script and shared it with everyone at the radio station. She accuses Gia of stealing her scripts. However, John arrives, scolds her in front of everyone, defends Gia, and leaves. That night, Gia goes out with the conceited writer and tells her that she used to respect her because she was her mentor, but from now on, she won't respect her anymore. A new Gia is born today, one with some directors and writers by her side. The writer, angry, yells at the director, and we learn that they were actually married. The next day, when news of the press conference that Kim is organizing for Suho reaches him, he is very upset. He even scolds his manager for not telling him about it. When Tara finds out that Gia is the girl Suho likes, she goes to her and gives her an invitation to the party, saying there's a surprise. On the day of the party, Tara calls Gia again and insists that she comes. Gia decides to go. At the party, Tara tells Gia that she is now officially with Suho, and they will announce their relationship. Gia is shocked. When Suho calls her, Tara takes the call, and then she asks him to come to the party since Gia is there. Suho has no choice but to go. He pulls Gia aside and asks her to respond to him the next time he calls. He confesses his feelings to her. Gia is surprised, but then Tara comes over and tells her to leave so she can be with her boyfriend, Suho. Gia leaves, upset. Does she beg Suho to continue the fake relationship for a while until she becomes more famous? But he refuses, leaving her and walking away. Later, when Gia goes home, she finds her mother passed out on the floor. She tries to call anyone for help, but then Suho calls her. She immediately tells him to help because her mother has fainted. Suho, who is already outside her building, takes her to the hospital to make sure her mother is okay. Afterward, Suho leaves, and Gia calls him to thank him. He tells her not to worry, to stay with her mom, and to forget everything he said about confessing his feelings to her. Kim, the conceited writer, is in a meeting with the board of directors, where she announces her approval of a new series for Suho, which will be filmed outside Korea. She also introduces his new girlfriend, Tara. The news spreads like wildfire, and the press talks about Suho leaving radio to do a new drama. Director John goes to speak to Kim, expressing his concerns that the program won't continue. But Kim tells him that Suho won't go against her decision. John respectfully scolds her and leaves. Later, Suho talks to Kim, telling her that he disagrees with her decision. When she tells him that Tara is threatening them with photos of her husband and the young actress, he says it's not his problem, it's her husband's problem. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Gia's mother wakes up and reassures her that she is fine and will take care of herself from now on. By chance, Gia meets a girl in the hospital who is feeling ill. The girl hears Gia mention that she is from the Heart to the Heart program. The girl gets excited, saying she loves the program and has always wanted to meet someone from it. She tells Gia that she sends her story every time, hoping it will be shared. She then returns to tell her mother, who is overjoyed. They reminisce about the time when her mother had surgery on her eye and they stayed at the hospital for a long period. After that, John visits Gia's mother. Soon everyone around them continues to gossip. Gia asks them to leave so her mother can rest. Gia then stays with her mother and talks to her. The sick girl visits Gia, thrilled and begging Gia to appear on her program. They are shocked when they learn that the girl has cancer, with only 6 months to live. John talks to Suho, saying that doing this for the girl, one of her biggest fans, would be a huge service. Afterward, Suho pretends to be sick to stay in the hospital, but John sees through it. John tells him the next project will take place in the hospital to counter all the rumors circulating that Suho is leaving radio. Meanwhile, Gia feels like she has known Suho for a long time. When his therapist arrives, he asks Gia to talk to him. She sits with him and asks who he is. He introduces himself as Suho's therapist. She tells him that she wants to ask him a few questions, and if he answers them, she'll tell him everything he wants to know. Suho is in his room, but Mrs. Kim comes to see him and tells him he is staying in the hospital, pretending to be ill. She adds that in a few days they will have a party, and it's good that he is there to attend. She also mentions that she knows about his relationship with Gia, but he is currently with Tara, who previously called him a miserable person. If he really wants misery for Gia, he should be with her. She leaves, and Suho is deeply affected by her words. Suho goes to the place where he used to sit with Gia when her mother was in the hospital. Gia, meanwhile, learns from the doctor that Suho was there during the period when her mother was being treated, and that's when they first met. She goes to Suho and asks if he's the same person she met back then in the hospital. He confirms it, and Gia is thrilled. She tells him that he should have told her sooner because she really enjoyed the time they spent together back then. While they are talking, they hear Tara coming and quickly hide in his room's closet since journalists are about to arrive. This is the perfect opportunity for Suho to tell Gia that there is nothing between him and Tara. Those are just rumors. Afterward, they both return to their rooms, but neither can sleep, both thinking about each other. The next day, the party that Kim organized takes place, where they honor young girls with cancer. It's a charitable event, and as Gia is in the elevator with Suho, she threatens him to leave radio and break up with Gia because they will ruin his future together. But Suho refuses. They go out in front of the people, laughing and holding hands as usual, lying to the press. Meanwhile, Gia continues to write about the new topic they will discuss. Suho grabs a blanket to cover her, but finds that John beat him to it. At that moment, the two men exchange challenging glances. Each of them admits to the other that they are fond of Gia. Both are completely smitten by her. This turns into a rivalry between them, but Suho decides to stay with Gia. When she wakes up, he removes the blanket from her and throws it away, giving her his own to cover herself with. Just then, he receives a call from the cancer patient. The girl is crying uncontrollably, telling them that her first love isn't responding to her or coming to visit her. Suho sits with the sick girl to calm her down. After a lot of conversation, she returns to her room. Meanwhile, Gia continues to tell him that Suho should do the next episode about this girl and have it filmed in the hospital. Suho agrees, but only on the condition that he asks her for 2 favors in return. After he returns home, he calls her and tells her that the first request is for her to cover herself with the blanket he gave her. This means he is willing to do the interview with the girl. The next day he goes to the company, and Mrs. Kim remains opposed to the idea of Suho doing the radio show. When her husband speaks and asks her to let his young actress girlfriend return to acting, Mrs. Kim breaks down, angrily hitting him. "You're so rude!" But when the elevator doors open, they both smile in front of the press, pretending everything is fine. Her rude husband asks Suho to agree with his wife and not upset her. Suho, however, tells him to stop what he's doing and stop being deceitful. Later that night, Suho goes to visit the sick girl in her room. He spends time with her and her friends, signing autographs and taking pictures, making them happy. The broadcast van arrives and John is also at the hospital, preparing for the new episode. The girl begins to speak about herself and her first love, which turns out to be her father. She says she loves her father deeply. Not in a clingy way, she explains that he works long hours to earn money for her medical treatment, and she hasn't seen him in over 2 months. She shares how he cries when he comes to visit her, and even when he is away, he cries because of her condition. Everyone, including her father, is deeply moved by her story. The delivery driver, who had been listening to her, immediately rushes to the hospital to see her. When the girl sees her father, she is overjoyed, exclaiming that he has finally come. When the girl asks Suho when the last time he spoke to his mother was, his eyes tear up, and he becomes sad. He says it was today, but just a casual conversation. He is so overcome with emotion that the girl tells him to act normal, but it's clear he is affected by her question. Meanwhile, Tara tries to reach Mrs. Kim, but as usual, she rejects her. Tara then goes to the greedy scriptwriter, discussing how they want to make an episode that will break records. The scriptwriter agrees to help. Meanwhile, Gia and her team, including the psychologist, go to John's house for a night of games. Suho doesn't know anything about this and keeps losing, drinking until he falls asleep. Afterward, the psychologist leaves and heads to meet Mrs. Kim. We learn that he has secretly agreed to sell Suho's movements to Mrs. Kim for money. John and Gia try to get Suho to stay at John's house for the night. During this, John asks Gia how close she is to Suho. She tells him that if he remembers the boy she loved back in high school, that's Suho. John is shocked and upset, but he hides it. The next morning, Suho wakes up and realizing he is at John's house, the two argue as usual. After Suho leaves, the psychologist, pretending to be friendly, informs him that Gia's mother has been discharged from the hospital. Suho finally understands why John was in such a rush earlier. He rushes to the hospital to see her. Meanwhile, he and John argue over who will get Gia and her mother to the hospital. At this point, Tara is with the writer working on the program. She doesn't leave a message without insulting the viewers and causing chaos in the episode. The writer and the director are in tears because of her foolishness. Let's leave them for now and move to Kim's husband, who has invited his mistress to a fancy restaurant. He promises her that he will get her back to work since Kim loves him and listens to him despite all the problems he causes. However, Kim unexpectedly enters and we find out that the girl had called Kim to come and upset her. At that moment, her husband quickly leaves the place. As he's leaving, Suho and Gia come to have dinner there. When Gia's father sees Suho, he says, "Good thing you're here. See your mom instead of eating the girl inside." Suho enters and finds the girl with pictures of herself and her father. She threatens her mother with them, hurting her out of spite. But Suho stops her, and she takes a deep breath and leaves. He takes the pictures, holding back tears just for Gia's sake. Meanwhile, Gia is struggling to grasp the miserable life he is living. When they sit down to eat, she tells him that she wants to leave. She takes him to a quiet spot in the garden where she tells him that she feels his pain, sympathizing with him because she knows he is suffering. When they return home, Suho finds his mother sleeping on the couch, waiting for him. He asks her why every time his husband causes a problem, she runs away, and they are the ones who have to fix everything. She doesn't have an answer for him, so he leaves her and enters his room. Then Gia calls him to escalate the situation, saying it wasn't her intention to hurt him, but he responds with frustration. "Please, don't hug me again. This is the third time you've done that." Both are upset because they're waiting for each other to raise the flag of love and move forward. The next day, there is a board meeting, which includes the radio manager. Gia tells them that if Suho continues working on the radio, she will exclude him from the company completely and will rely on the new generation of artists. Everyone is shocked by this news, and the radio manager tries to smooth things over, but he can't because she has already made up her mind. At this time, Suho buys a new car and waits for Gia outside her house. He tells her he's there to drive her to work. When she tells him that her house is closer to work, he asks her to take him back home. Then, he gives her the car key, telling her it's a gift for her, along with other gifts inside the car. Before she can refuse, she takes the car and goes to work because she's running late. At work, she meets Joe, and they talk about their script. He tells her the script isn't complete and is weak. He continues criticizing her, telling her that from now on, he expects her to treat him like any other professional. She doesn't understand why he's acting this way and why he's changed toward her, but it's clear that he's different now. Meanwhile, Suho goes to the radio station to talk to Gia. She tells him that he has been coming to the radio every day, which is unusual. He tells her that he wants to talk to her, but they are unable to have a real conversation. Then John, Suho's assistant, tells him that he discovered something very serious. Articles about an accident that occurred 12 years ago involving Suho's friend. This makes John remember the first episode with Suho, when he kept receiving handwritten letters and messages on the website accusing Suho of being a killer. This prompts him to go and speak to Suho's manager to ask about what happened 12 years ago. However, the manager refuses to tell him anything. At this point, Gia is talking to Tara, telling her that she will make her act in the new series with Suho. This series is supposed to be filmed outside Korea, and they will be staying abroad for about a year and a half. Meanwhile, Tara keeps calling his manager, but he doesn't answer, so she goes to his house and drags him out to go out together. She keeps crying as usual, begging him to help her. When he asks her what he can do for her, she tells him that he has a recording proving that Suho's family is not his real family. She wants him to give it to her, but he refuses, not wanting to expose Suho. On the other hand, John is sitting with Gia, telling her to write down what she's feeling so that she can communicate more clearly. He can't bear to see her upset. Later, Gia calls Suho to meet her because she's feeling nervous. When they meet, he tells her that he loves her and wants to be with her. And they go to his house where he shows her things he loves. He asks her if they can go out tomorrow, and she agrees. Meanwhile, the psychologist is with Kim, giving her money and telling her to convince Suho to travel. The next day, Gia goes to work dressed beautifully, and everyone can tell she's probably in a relationship. Even John notices that the scripts she wrote are amazing. The episode they air is great, but after it ends, John asks everyone to go out for dinner. Gia can't join them, so she apologizes to Suho, telling him they will make it up another day since they were supposed to meet today. Suho then goes to his manager after learning that Kim has already finalized the series. He argues with her, and she tells him that someone has threatened her, saying they will release pictures of him and Gia. She tells him that there is a conference the next day, and if he doesn't go and announce that he'll act in the series, the pictures will be released. The next day, a shocking news spreads, and everyone is talking about it. Suho is leaving the radio to act again. John's assistant rushes to tell him about what happened, and John immediately goes to Suho before the conference and scolds him, saying he trusted him. Meanwhile, Gia keeps trying to contact Suho, but he's not responding, leaving her devastated. She accepts the situation as it is, knowing that the program is over. However, at the end of the day, Suho comes to the radio station and approaches her. He tells her to trust him, showing her the conference where he confirmed that he would continue with the radio while also acting in the series. He then drives her home. Gia immediately tells John everything, and he says he needs to call Suho to apologize. The next day, Suho tells the board that he will do both the radio and the series, and that he has no intention of quitting the radio. This frustrates Kim, and she tries to argue with him, but he tells her that he will do what he wants. She makes some calls, and unfortunately, the radio station owner speaks to the manager, telling him that they need to cancel Suho's program. Later, John and Gia go to Suho to officially apologize, and he accepts their apology. They decide to sit down and eat together, but Suho takes Gia to show her his room, while the doctor takes John to show him the house. When they enter the doctor's room, John notices a paper with the psychiatrist's handwriting on it. He realizes that this is the same handwriting used in the messages sent to the radio station, accusing Suho of being a murderer. This leads John to suspect the doctor. When they return to the radio station, the manager informs John that the program has been canceled, which makes him very upset. The entire team starts packing up their things to leave. Suho finds John and Gia and decides to spend time with them, but they refuse to tell him the reason behind the program's cancellation, even though they suspect that Kim's mother is involved. At this point, Tara pretends to be drunk and goes to sit in front of the manager's house. He lets her in quickly and rushes to the pharmacy to get something to sober her up. However, Tara, being deceitful, sneaks around the house, takes the recording, and leaves. Meanwhile, she continues drinking until she falls asleep. John tries to place something under her neck to help her, but Suho gets upset. They end up arguing and fighting, but they both calm down and go back to her house. When they learn that her mother isn't home, they decide to spend the night in the room next to hers, suspicious of the other. The next morning, they wake up and find that she's prepared breakfast for everyone. They sit down to eat together, but she's still uncomfortable with their presence. Later, the manager arrives to take Suho to the shoot. John, feeling idle, decides to take Gia out for a while. Suho is upset about this and keeps calling her, asking her to go with him, but she's busy. Meanwhile, Tara goes to count the recordings and plans to give them to Suho. He's having dinner at an expensive hotel with the board members, and by coincidence, the greedy writer and the director, his ex-husband, are also eating at the same hotel. When the writer sees Suho, she gets very upset and decides to keep an eye on him. Gia, on the other hand, decides to go alone and calls her mother to tell her everything. Her mother is happy to hear that Gia has found someone she loves and feels like a bird in love, but Suho calls Gia asking her to meet him at the hotel. She agrees and goes to see him. He asks her to come up to his room. The writer sees her and starts looking for her. Gia, feeling nervous because it's her first time being alone with the person she loves, is still unsure. Then the surprise comes when Tara shows up at the hotel. When she sees Gia with Suho, she gets furious. She tries to blackmail him with the recording, but when he ignores her, she slaps Gia and provokes her, calling her despicable and a failure, all while the writer and the director watch from a distance. Soon after, Suho's manager arrives, and they all head to their cars. Tara hopes that Suho will listen to the recording, but he's not interested. He tells her he feels sorry for her because she's like a night owl. He then takes Gia and leaves. When Tara tries to make her manager take her home, he scolds her, telling her that he was deceived by her, and that if she dies in front of him, he won't help her again. He walks away with a broken heart because of her. She finally feels rejected because of her actions. Suho goes to Gia and apologizes for everything that happened. John starts protesting on the radio and on social media about their show, and many people are engaging with him. Tara tries to provoke Gia whenever she comes to the radio station, but Gia remains unfazed. Even when Tara suggests that she might have the recording, Gia still doesn't care. John goes to speak with the radio station manager about the show, and the manager shocks him by revealing that Kim used her influence to get the show canceled. John realizes that Kim was behind it, and understands that both he and Gia had known about it but didn't tell him. He confronts them, accusing them of not treating him like part of the team, and storms off. Later, John invites the psychiatrist over and confronts him, expressing his suspicions, but the doctor denies everything. Gia waits outside the house for over 3 hours in the cold, hoping to apologize to him. At the same time, John is at Kim's house arguing with her. When he returns, he finds Gia inside talking to him, and they reconcile. He drives her home, and later, John also apologizes to him for lying. The next day, John speaks with Kim's mother and tells her that he will resign from the company if she doesn't stop what she's doing. The issue with the show is resolved, and it's set to return. The owner of the show calls the manager, asking him to bring the show back immediately. John is thrilled, but since the original slot is already taken, they're given a 4 a.m. time, which is very early. Suho refuses, and John argues with him, threatening to find someone else to replace him. Suho walks away. Later, when John checks, he finds a message accusing Suho of being a murderer. When he compares the handwriting with the psychiatrist's, he starts to suspect him as well. Then, Gia visits Suho and tries to convince him to return to the show, but he refuses. The following day, as expected, Suho returns, and the episode is a huge success. When he goes to drop Gia off, John refuses to leave and insists on talking to her. He reminds her of their memories together and tells her that she was an exceptional person to him, This is why he confesses his love for her. However, Gia is unsure how to respond and decides to go on her own. Suho asks John if he confessed his feelings to Gia, and John admits that he did. Suho agrees that the competition is now fair. Gia is confused and doesn't know what to do or who to choose. Gia talks to her mother and later realizes that she loves Suho, the artist. The next script she writes is about not wanting to lose someone dear to her, and she's referring to Suho. After the episode, John asks to speak with her and she agrees, inviting him for a drink. She tells him that he's always been a good person and that she's impressed by him, but politely rejects his feelings. He understands that she's turning down his love, but says that he doesn't want to lose her and would like to remain friends. He accepts her decision. Meanwhile, Tara waits outside the manager's house. When she sees him, she gives him money and asks him to become her agent. He refuses her offer and leaves, explaining that he first met her years ago when she asked him to pretend to be her agent in front of her mother and her mother's husband so her mother could travel and be reassured about her. He recalls how, after that, she cried in the car, and since that day, he's loved her. However, he still refuses her offer. Then Gia goes to Suho and tells him that she rejected John, which makes him very happy. They decide to spend the day together. Meanwhile, the doctor is sitting with Kim and asks her about the accident that happened to Suho's friend 12 years ago, but she refuses to share any useful information. At the radio station, Suho and Gia can't stand each other. A few days later, Suho's mother calls Gia and asks to meet. She offers Gia a job at her company. The next day, Kim is shocked to find that Suho has submitted his resignation. Then Suho's pictures start circulating and people turn against him. John manages to catch up with her before she leaves the house and shows her the articles. She starts receiving calls from Suho's fans, which upset her, so she turns off her phone. Suho, feeling anxious about her, calls her to check on her. When John tells her to stay at home, she says she can't stop thinking, so she needs to go to the radio to continue working. But when they arrive, they find many of Suho's fans protesting and threatening to attack her. Gia doesn't know what to do, but then Suho and his manager arrive. Suho grabs her hand and leads her in front of everyone, publicly announcing that they are a couple. He then begins hosting his show. When one of his fans calls and asks how he could love a girl like Gia, Suho answers that he loves her truly, and love is not a shame, and he will stay with her. This further angers the fans. After the episode, John talks to Gia and asks if she is ready to face what will happen next. She says yes, and she will stand by Suho until they get through this. John decides to support him as well. They both step outside in front of everyone, and John scolds the fans standing outside the station, telling them they're just high school girls who should go study instead. However, things don't stop there. Suho goes home to find his manager and the doctor waiting for him, but he doesn't want to talk to anyone. Kim asks Suho's manager to keep an eye on him, but this time he refuses. He explains that he did it in the past, thinking it was in Suho's best interest, but not anymore. At that moment, he sees the doctor writing Suho is a killer on a piece of paper. The doctor lies and says he found it in the mail. Meanwhile, Gia feels almost trapped in her house. Her friends come over to spend time with her, but later, other girls arrive to protest in front of her house. John steps in and scolds them. After a while, he goes into the restaurant downstairs and orders food and drinks for them to calm them down. During this time, Gia manages to escape and goes with John to his house. But the situation doesn't end there either. A few days later, the girls continue to protest. Then Gia's mother arrives. When they speak ill of Gia, her mother scolds them, and soon the police arrive and take them away. Gia goes to finalize the report, takes her mother, and leaves. Suho, meanwhile, is completely worn out by everything happening around him. He decides to talk to the doctor and tells him everything. We learn that when his condition was first diagnosed as depression, he was admitted to the hospital for a period. While there, he met a young man named Jiho, who had cancer and was expected to live only a few more days. Jiho had a beautiful voice and was incredibly talented. Gia was actually introduced to Suho by Jiho because Jiho was in love with her. The first memories Gia had were with Jiho, but over time, Suho also fell in love with her. Years later, when he met Gia again, he couldn't bring himself to tell her that he wasn't the Jiho she had loved back then. The devious doctor calls Gia and tells her that Suho is not the same Jiho she loved in the hospital. If she wants all the details, she should ask him directly. Gia is shocked by this revelation, so she decides to confront Suho. She asks him, and Suho opens up to her. He tells her that he had loved her for a long time. He had even told his friend Jiho, who was dying, that he loved the same girl. We learn that Jiho had entered a singing competition, and he won, making it to the finals. Jiho had told Suho that if he won, he would confess his love to Gia. On the day of the competition, Suho went to support Jiho. But unfortunately, he was afraid Jiho would win and confess his feelings to Jia. So Suho decided to leave and not attend the competition, even though Jiho kept calling him. Eventually, Suho saw Jiho on the road, and in a rush, he crossed the street without looking around, and tragically, a car hit Jiho, causing his death. Since then, Suho has felt guilty, believing he was the reason for Jiho's death. But Jia forgives him for everything, and she decides to stay by his side. When she finds out that he suffers from insomnia and can't sleep, she stays next to him to comfort him. The next day is Suho's birthday, and his family calls to tell him they are planning a celebration and the press will be there, so he needs to attend. However, Suho refuses, saying he doesn't want the press and that he would celebrate the day alone. But his family insists on throwing a big party. At that moment, a small actress arrives and threatens Kim and her husband, who then leaves to calm his mistress down. Meanwhile, a video of Suho thanking everyone for attending his birthday celebration, for the sake of appearances. Jia, who is at the celebration, steps out behind her manager and continues to talk to him. Suddenly, someone nearly hits her with their car, but her manager saves her in time. In that moment, Jia confesses her love to her manager, saying she wants to be with him. He, of course, is surprised, but agrees to her proposal. Jia tries to celebrate Suho's birthday alone with him, but their moment is interrupted by Joe, who tells them they are needed at the radio station. They go and record the show for the day, but things take a turn. Suho's manager arrives to take him away, and during this time, the doctor is with Kim. He tells her everything that happened and admits that he was the one who spread the rumors about Suho being a killer because he wanted to confront Suho about his illness. However, Kim tells him that she didn't want any of this. She only wanted him to treat his insomnia, and she refuses him. When Suho returns home, he discovers that Jia knows everything. He tells her he never wants to see him again and asks him to leave the house. And as all the troubles seem to come at once, the young actress appears on TV and reveals a shocking truth, saying that Suho's father had been in a long-term relationship with her. This causes an uproar. Suho then decides to hold a press conference. In front of everyone, he admits that his entire family was fake and that his real father is indeed his father, but no one knows who his mother is. However, Kim raised him as if she were his real mother after she discovered she could not have children. This revelation makes the press even more hostile towards them, but Suho decides to stay on the path he has chosen. Later, he walks away feeling like he wants to be alone, as the world turns against him. He goes to the place where he first met Jiho, and even though he doesn't want Jia to see him in this state, she manages to find him. She goes to him, gets close, and comforts him. Since the press is gathered around his house, Jia takes him to the accommodation at the radio station, where they spend some time. Later, they meet the team, and Joe tells them to take advantage of the situation, suggesting that in today's show, Suho and Jia should speak honestly and truthfully about themselves, and share everything with the public. The episode becomes a huge success, easing the pressure on them. In the following episode, Joe arrives impeccably dressed and they record a great episode together, which turns out to be their final show with him. Joe tells them he's returning to his home country. Jia is upset and confused. When Suho asks her why she's so upset, she tells him that Joe is leaving today. Suho rushes to the airport to catch him and says goodbye as though they were the closest of friends. Joe gives Suho the key to a house, and it's revealed that Joe bought the apartment where Jia lives so he could stay close to her. After their farewell, time passes, and Jia becomes a lead writer, as she had always dreamed. Joe, now a director, creates a beautiful show. Suho grows closer to his mother, Kim, and they agree to work together. Their relationship improves. Later, Suho proposes to Jia, and she agrees, and they get married. Even Tara gets into an argument with her manager, having returned to her wild ways and partying again in nightclubs. She storms off to confront him, but he proposes to her in a romantic setting, and she accepts, deciding never to leave him again. They also decide to spend the rest of their lives together. In the end, they live happily, just like in a fairy tale. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out more recaps you'll absolutely love right here.